It's just super fun.
What's it called?
John McNabb, by John Buchan, the author of 39 Steps. Just delightfully fun. If you want some fun light reading, you can't get any better than that. Alex set me onto it. I recommend the audio version because of all the wonderful Scottish accents. All right, well, so last week we talked about gratitude, and we used that as an opportunity to discuss spiritual emotions. We kind of zigzag back and forth between talking about gratitude and the principles and theology by which we can understand spiritual emotions. So I wanted to continue with that this week, but we're going to start by reviewing some of the material from last week. A number of you weren't able to make it last week, but it's also good to review. So we talked about this progression. We talked about how over years of right behavior and obedience to God's commands, we come to have good habits. Then good habits lead to character traits. Character traits result in us loving God's commands. And loving God's commands correlates to rightly ordered affections, spiritual emotions, and attitudes and dispositions. And this results in true freedom. Now, this isn't a linear step-by-step progression because all of these components exist as webs of multiple reciprocities. But the point is that they're related. So, and this is important because if we want to understand about the role that attitudes and emotions play within the spiritual life, we have to move beyond kind of legalism where simply being ethical and simply doing right behavior is our goal. We have to understand that right behavior over time leads to rightly ordered attitudes. And we see this in the Church of Liturgy. When we, at the beginning of the Divine Office, we ask God to kindle my affections. Or we can think of St. Ambrose's pre-communion prayer, where we ask God for the renewal of good desires. And this renewal of good desires points towards the importance of rightly ordered dispositions and attitudes. And this is what virtue is all about. Virtue isn't just about doing what's right. That's only step one, like a toddler learning pedestrian commands. But eventually the toddler grows to have character. Similarly, as we obey God's commands, we develop character, which is virtue, the virtues, and then this leads to the freedom of rightly ordered desires. And one kind of stark and, for me, helpful example of the role of rightly ordered desires is in this book, this wonderful little book by Edward Sri. He gives an example to show the importance of rightly ordered attitudes and desires. He asks us to consider who is the better husband. Is it someone who comes up to his wife and says, "Honey, I really wanted to be unfaithful to you today. I had a strong desire to commit adultery, but I love you so much that I resisted"? Or is it the husband for whom adultery isn't even an option, it's not even something desired because the very idea is repulsive to him? And in the saints, we see this kind of rightly ordered emotion. A saint doesn't want to be gluttonous, selfish, miserly, and lustful, but somehow, through willpower, forces himself not to be. A saint is somebody who enjoys being good And certainly there are temptations and suffering, but even suffering and feats of asceticism occur within the framework of rightly ordered affections, including spiritual attitudes. And spiritual attitudes today are also very misunderstood. Just as there's the tendency to reduce virtue to mere action, there's also the tendency to reduce attitudes to pure subjective emotion. And what is lost is that our attitudes, including what we are attracted to and what we find desirable, can be in alignment or disalignment with the bedrock structure of reality. And this is something that C.S. Lewis discussed in his book. There goes my notes. In his book, The Abolition of Man. So our friend C.S. Lewis, drawing on Plato, he noted that the goal of education is ultimately the cultivation of right attitudes and rightly ordered desires. And that would include affection. He said, until quite modern times, all teachers and even all men believe the universe to be such that certain emotional reactions on our part could be either congruous or incongruous to it. Believed, in fact, that objects did not merely receive, but could merit our approval or disapproval, our reverence or our contempt. So in the historic understanding that Lewis was articulating, virtue includes action, but involves so much more, namely fitting attitudes. And while attitudes include emotion, they involve much more, including having your emotions and attitudes aligned to reality. And so spiritual attitudes and emotions might include things like reverence, empathy, joy, hope, compassion, love, patience, disgust. I'll explain why disgust is there in a second. And of course, gratitude and adjacent virtues like contentment and thankfulness and gratefulness. Gratefulness is pretty much just a different word for gratitude. So how can these attitudes have alignment or disalignment with reality itself? Well, if you think of the emotion of reverence, the reverence when you are in the presence of the Holy Sacrament is in alignment with how reality actually is. And the attitude of reverence includes more than mere emotion, obviously, but it doesn't include less. To have reverence in the presence of the Holy Sacrament is in alignment with what is really going on in the Mass. Or again, the emotion of disgust at what is disordered can be in alignment with the reality of God's design for us as men and women. So that when we violate God's design for us as men and women, disgust can be a rightly ordered emotional response. So again, our emotions, including what we consider ennobling and what causes disgust, can be aligned or disaligned with reality. So, and that brings us back to gratitude, because cultivating gratitude is one way that we bring our emotions into alignment with what is true and what is real. And gratitude includes the thoughts, the emotions, and the behaviors. And I shared this last time. So just by way of review, we looked at the web of reciprocities between how we think, how we behave, and how we feel. And to understand the importance of our thoughts, think back to what I said a minute ago about feeling reverence in the presence of the Holy Sacrament. to feel reverence depends on many things, including correct thoughts and beliefs. So if you think that a memorial view of the supper is correct, that will likely impact your ability to feel reverence in the presence of the Holy Sacrament. So what we think, including having correct doctrines and right theology, can impact our feeling. And similarly with the emotion of hope, having correct theology about eschatology, about God's providence, or working all things to the eschatological end, that will affect whether we have a spiritual emotion of hope. And similarly, there are behaviors can affect our emotions. So if we, continuing on the theme of hope, if we watch hopeless movies or choose to fill our minds with a diet of hopeless music, that will affect our emotions and over time even our thoughts. So this web of reciprocity between our behaviors and our thoughts and our emotions, this gives us a clue to how we can develop gratitude. And we can leverage this in cultivating thankfulness. And I shared this last time in response to a question that somebody asked. And I'm not going to dwell on this very long because I want to get to some of the new material. I've got a lot of good stuff that I want to share with you, but I wanted to just do this review. So notice that in the thinking section I talk about life-giving thoughts. And that's really the area of focus that I wanted to share today. About cognitive reframing, how we can move from ungrateful and negative thoughts to cognitions that are life-giving. So we call this. So when we think of like a frame around work of art, the frame gives context and meaning and a framework to the work of art. Similarly, the things that we attend to in our minds give a meaning and context to how we interpret our experiences. And cognitive reframing offers a way to be conscious about our mindset and to deliberately look for positive ways to frame our experiences. And when I say positive, I mean thoughts and frameworks that are rooted in reality. The reality is that our Heavenly Father loves us so much that He is using everything that happens to us, including our suffering, to make us more like His Son, Jesus Christ. And our Heavenly Father does not let anything happen to us that can't be used to make us more like Jesus. And that is the foundation of gratitude and reframing. That our Father's love. So when all is said and done, why should I be grateful? Because I have a Father in heaven who loves me and will not let anything happen to me that cannot be used to propel me close to Him. And when we rest secure in our Father's love, we can reframe everything in a life-giving way. But often that's not the natural default mode of the fallen human mind. Often we frame our experiences negatively. Imagine you know someone whose boyfriend is always tearing her down, always telling her that she can't cope, that she's not pretty enough, that nobody likes her. What would you say to her? Obviously, you would encourage her to break up with her negative boyfriend, or at least to stop listening to his frequent criticisms. And even though that's the advice that we would give to somebody else, when it comes to ourselves, we listen to the negativity that comes into our brain and the toxic cognitions. Rather than breaking up with our negative brain, we often start paying attention to all of the negativity that the demons put in our minds. For example, our brain will minimize the good that God is working in our life. In your thoughts, do you show the same loving compassion to yourself that you would show towards a friend? Do you spend time engaged in morbid introspection, analyzing your darker feelings? Now, this is not to make anybody feel guilty. This is what we all do. This is the default mode of the fallen human mind. Imagining future scenarios that may never transpire, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read all of these, but these are some common negative tendencies that all of us struggle with. And so cognitive reframing is a way to disrupt these types of negative thoughts with life-giving thoughts that are rooted in the promises of God. And I'll share some of those promises in a minute. But first I want to just do a little brush clearing work and to say that cognitive reframing is not positive thinking. I have a quote here from a cool book. Reframing is not about being unrealistically optimistic, nor is it about tricking your brain to feel good when you are really miserable. You will not grow spiritually by disrupting negative thoughts with happy images of rainbows, bunny rabbits, and chocolate. In fact, sometimes the most positive thing a person can do is to acknowledge what is wrong in his or her life. The key to reframing is to align your thinking with the objective reality of God's promises, together with the comfort, hope, and confidence those promises bring. Reality. Why are people laughing? Oh, okay. I don't know why I did that. Okay. So, anyway, so what I mean when I say like God's promises, and I have some examples. Okay. I have some examples here. I just went through and wrote down some negative things, some negative ways that we often will frame our experiences, and then how we can counter that with promises from Holy Scripture. I'm not going to read all of these, but I'm just putting them here as an example. And here are some others. You can I'll read a couple. So anyway, I'll just let you, I don't want to spend time reading all these, but I'll just let you look at them for a little bit. Okay, so one master of reframing was St. John Chrysostom, and most of you are probably familiar with this wonderful little book, his letters to St. Olympia. I believe some of the ladies recently read it for a retreat. So the background to these letters is that he had made an enemy of the wicked Roman Empress Eudoxia, and hoping to silence him, she sent soldiers to take him away into exile in 404. And his friend, St. Olympia, fell into enormous distress and turmoil. She had been very close to him, and they worked together in the governing of the churches. And his exile, as well as the general persecution that resulted at the time, left her in a state of loneliness and even despair. And we don't have her letters, but we know that she was struggling with this because we have his replies, which Dr. David Ford translated and collected in this volume. And one of the things I found very helpful was that he showed again and again in these letters that anything that happens can be reframed and put in a spiritual and life-giving context. And when I was reading the book, I was making notes, and I kind of summarized in my own words, so if I could distill down his principles and his advice to her, I came up with 7 or 8 bullet points, which I'd like to share with you. And he was very, we'll just jump right into the first one here. Nobly endure emotional pain with meekness and thanksgiving. Okay, that sounds pretty straightforward, but then became even more radical and said you can rejoice even in emotional pain and physical pain. She was dealing with suffering mainly on the emotional level. Struggle to lay hold of joy in the midst of hardship. No matter what you may be feeling inside, struggle to resist the spirit of fear, despondency, and hopelessness. When suffering emotional pain, take care of yourself physically and emotionally for the sake of those who love you, and also so that you can be stronger for resisting temptation. This is important. He was a strong advocate of what we would call self-care. So he talked about the necessity of warm baths, of herbal remedies. He talks about different medicinal tinctures that he used. He especially advocated self-care for people who are struggling emotionally, so that they can be stronger for resisting temptation, so that they can be stronger for those that depend on them. So I thought that was interesting how practical he was. Very practical, and would often give her practical advice about self-care. Continually remind yourself that there is only one thing that can actually harm you, and only one thing that is truly distressing and worth being afraid about, and that's sin. He has a whole sermon about that, in fact. A sermon to prove that no man can injure the person who does not injure himself. I recommend you look it up. Then he also said that we can respond to emotional pain with life-giving thoughts, such as reflection on the future rewards laid up for those who patiently endure suffering, including the suffering of emotional pain. No matter how intense your afflictions may be, strive to keep your soul fixed on Christ. And strive to accept all difficulties calmly and graciously as sent from Providence for your spiritual growth. And this last point is very countercultural to Americans, because we are often taught that the pursuit of happiness is a basic human right. I've been told that some state constitutions include the right to achieve and not merely to pursue happiness as a basic human right. The right to pursue and achieve happiness. But this mentality, which is very, very axiomatic to us as Americans, sets people up to be miserable, because I've been absolutely fascinated with a number of studies which show that the more somebody is focused on happiness as one of their goals, the more miserable they actually are in daily self-evaluations. And some of this research was collected by the Harvard Medical School psychologist Susan David. In her book, she collected and curates some of the peer-reviewed research on this subject. And she shared a string of studies showing how the pursuit of happiness is often very self-defeating. And that the more people are focused on happiness as one of their objective goals, the more miserable they are in daily self-evaluations. And the conclusion of this research is that genuinely happy people have given up the pursuit of happiness and learned to be content in all circumstances, including the circumstance of not feeling happy. So St. John Chrysostom was right, and we are finding now through. Let's just back up to give you a little context of some of this research. So psychology for a long time was focused on everything that could go wrong. So psychology, both before and after Freud, tended to be fixated with what we would call abnormal psychology. And in the 20th century, the positive psychology movement began to ask, okay, well, what do things look like when they go right? What is the profile of a person who's flourishing? And again, the research, and this is ironic that this would come out of the positive psychology movement, the research is that a flourishing life is one where we are not trying to be happy. And why is that? It seems counterintuitive. And a reason was suggested by one happiness researcher, Dan Gilbert. He has a laboratory at Stanford where he studies happiness. And through a number of intriguing studies, it's very intriguing the methodology that he used on these studies. We're not going to go into all the details, but I'll just tell you what he found out in his laboratory. He found out that, this is a laboratory where it says human subjects, obviously, because we're dealing with happiness. He found out that there are two types of happiness. One type is what he calls natural happiness. And these are his terms. I don't really like his terminology, but that's the terminology is not the point. The point is that way he found out that there is a type of happiness that you receive when you get what you want, and this is very short-lived. So, if somebody gives you a car that you really want, yeah, you're going to be happy for a week or so because you've got something you want. That type of happiness is real, but it's short-lived and it's limited. And there's another type of happiness, which he calls, and again, this is his terminology, synthetic happiness. And this is the type of happiness you make for yourself when you don't get what you want, but your attitude is still one of contentment. And the really interesting part of his research, the take-home point, is that sometimes it takes deprivation in the realm of natural happiness, when you're not having your needs and desires met, to propel a person to produce synthetic happiness, which is a type of happiness rooted purely in the attitude of contentment. And he found that when a person's external world becomes unusually restricted, when you're not getting what you want, it often forces a person to realize resources for contentment and joy available within their own hearts. Resources they may not have accessed if their life had remained free of suffering. And so this is, I just find it fascinating that contemporary research is catching up with the scriptural insight that the virtues of contentment and thankfulness and gratitude are central to human flourishing. So I thought we could open for questions now, and about the material today or last week. If anybody, or not even any questions, but if anybody has any observations or anecdotes that you'd like to share about this. Oh yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I can direct it to you or Father, or you guys can team it. But I'm trying to understand that fine line between the virtue of joy and happiness. So how you can be in a state of joy but be crying at the same time. So how do you I don't understand scripturally, spiritually, how our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ would distinguish between the virtue of joy and happiness that we work on.
I wouldn't be able to distinguish that in any kind of formal way. I think the word joy is better, because like we use the word happiness can be very shallow. If somebody's on drugs or drinking a bunch of alcohol, they can be happy, but few of us would actually call that genuine, deep joy. So it seems like happiness is a term that can cover more shallow and fleeting feelings, but beyond that, I wouldn't be able to distinguish them in any formal way. And part of the problem with being able to distinguish those is that historically happiness has had deeper theological connotations, like the beatific vision, the happy vision of God, and so forth. And when you look at happiness in like medieval philosophers, it is not this kind of shallow, fleeting thing. And so it'd be interesting to, and maybe other people have more knowledge about this. But I find the term problematic because of the difference from how it's been used in past centuries versus how it's used now. And there was a very interesting Marcel audio interview about, I think his name is David Noble. He wrote a book about this whole subject. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, but
Forgive me if you talked about this last week. People think of the term instant gratification. So in a world where we can be instantly gratified with whatever we want to buy or receive or get, how does that play into a lack? I think the answer is what you talked about, the lack of gratitude. In other words, if contentment and gratification are not even really the same thing, what's that?
yeah. So that's what this guy's research was about. He found that when people are able to constantly have instant gratification, when they're able to get the stuff that they want, then they're caught within this loop where they're continually getting short-term happiness for stuff, and then when it wears off, then there's a dopamine deficit state, and you have to do it again to get more happiness, to get more instant gratification. And when people when people have a lifestyle where they are not receiving instant gratification, like he talks about Buddhist monks, but Christian monks would be the same thing, then they are able to tap into reserves of joy and contentment that are not rooted in instant gratification. And that's what he calls synthetic happiness. He's not writing theologically, so he uses terms that I don't like. Yeah, I don't like his terms, but anyway, so the when you're stuck within that lifestyle of instant gratification, you get dopamine spikes followed by a dopamine deficit state, because the dopamine deficit state is the body's way of trying to achieve homeostasis after a dopamine spike. You'll get something that really makes you happy, you go above baseline dopamine, and then the body wants to achieve homeostasis, so it sends you into a dopamine deficit state. And then to get out of that dopamine deficit state, many people will seek to engage in the behavioral or chemical addiction again. And whether it's shopping, partying or whatever, that gives you that instant gratification. And so then it's, you're stuck in this loop, which over time actually lowers your baseline dopamine. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just found it ironic that Thanksgiving has become the beginning of the shopping season.
Oh, yeah. I hate going shopping because you go into the mall and you start having all these needs that I didn't realize that I had. Why would I want to go into a place that makes me feel like I need and want things that I never even realized that I needed or wanted? So I want to really problematize the whole shopping and consumerism thing, but that's a different topic. Is somebody over here? Oh yeah, Brian.
Why don't you say a bit more about choosing to be content? Because when we're talking about emotions and attitudes and things like that, usually I wouldn't think like, oh, well, let me just choose to be content, right? Like it's an immediate object of choice. But a lot of what you're talking about is you're in this situation, and you're making a choice to accept it in a certain moment, right? Could you say a bit more about what does it look like to choose to be content if my emotions might be all over?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I'm going to go back to last week's, because some of the people were not here, and we can review, but I will address your question here. Okay, so because content, and if anybody else has any ideas about this, please just jump in. But my understanding is that because contentment involves emotion, we can't just go and grab it directly. Oh, I'm going to feel content. I'm going to feel content. I'm going to make myself feel content. You can't just directly manufacture emotions. We have to come at, if I'm not feeling content or I'm not feeling some other spiritual emotion, you have to come at it sideways through your emotions and thoughts. So just as kneeling and saying a prayer of penitence can lead to the emotion of contrition, similarly engaging in practices and cognitions which are focused on contentment, that can lead to the attitude of contentment because of this web of multiple reciprocities between thoughts and behaviors. And simply trying to have a contentment attitude and leaving it at that is about as successful as trying to have a dieting attitude or an exercise attitude. Having an exercise attitude is not going to do me any good unless I actually get out and engage in exercise. And it's interesting, Brené Brown, when she was writing her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, she shares how she used to assume that people were grateful because they were naturally joyful. But after devoting countless hours to interviewing hundreds of people about joy and gratitude, a surprising pattern began to unfold. Her research began showing that joy emerged out of a conscious choice to engage in gratitude activities, not the other way around. And the same would be true of contentment, which is closely related to gratitude, even though it has a slightly different nuance. Without exception, every person I interviewed who described living a joyful life or who described themselves as joyful actively practiced gratitude and attributed their joyfulness to their gratitude practice. When it comes to gratitude, the word that jumped out at me throughout this research is practice. And gratitude, how do you practice gratitude or contentment, which is similar? You can engage in gratitude journaling, making a point to thank people you appreciate, focusing on blessings you take for granted, refusal to verbalize complaints or criticisms regardless of how you feel, though that needs to be qualified, can't be absolutized. Sometimes it can be therapeutic to talk about things that are wrong, but 90% of the complaints we do only make us feel worse and don't have a therapeutic component. Imagining what your life would be like if certain things were taken away, and then making a point of thanking God for those things. And then cognitive reframing, which we've already talked about. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned contentment being related to gratitude. So I think maybe the only other thing, maybe the last thought that we need to be connected is what does it look like to practice contentment? Practicing gratitude makes sense. Is contentment a byproduct of practicing gratitude?
Yeah, did you have a thought about that?
I think contentment is a byproduct of stability.
Would you like to expand on that?
Yes, I would. As a matter of fact. Discontent. So if you're thinking about what it feels like to be discontent, which is a perennial problem, which gets half the people sitting in prison right now probably are there because they were bored. So when we think about how much trouble we get ourselves in for being bored or discontent, we try to alleviate that by going and searching for something to take care of it so that we can be content. And we need to do just the opposite. We need to bear in where we are. We need to remain stable. We need to, there's something that's causing us to fail to make a meaningful connection. And it could be any number of things. It could be a test from God. It could be sin. It could be just a natural developmental stage and process and spiritual maturity, and emotional, psychological, mental maturity and growth. Doesn't really matter what it is. not to try and go look for something else. Whether it's a new spouse, a new job, a new church, a new prayer rule, a new rite, whatever the case may be. And if you practice this, so this goes to behavior. If you practice this religiously, you will learn how to cultivate contentment in all circumstances.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And as you were talking, I couldn't help but think how our modern world and has all sorts of pressures against boring in and being content where you are, because we have so many things that can make us excited and feed our desire for novelty and distraction and so forth. And then that can be very destabilizing in our lives. And our lives are so easy. Life is so easy for most of us. I mean, comparatively, nobody would say their life is easy, but we're historically speaking, our lives do not have a lot of hardship and challenge, comparatively speaking. So, adding in ascetic labors and so forth is probably the healthy way to introduce some challenge and hardship, rather than going off and looking for excitement and novelty. Do you have any feedback about that?
Yeah, if you're wandering around your house, it's lunchtime, you're bored, and you think, oh, I'm going to go out and grab a Chick-fil-A sandwich. Don't. Go make an egg or a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Or you're feeling a little bored, discontent, and disappointed in something, you think, I'm going to go buy something on Amazon. Don't. That's how you do it. I understand how somebody who started praying the Psalms 5 years ago and was really convinced that this was a really good and healthy thing to do, all of a sudden it's no longer really important anymore. How does that make any sense? To get that perception. And then we run around all over the place trying to figure out what's wrong with us.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
Rob, I think in one of your slides, it's about but I think one of your slides, I think I saw the word strive. That I think sometimes in the moment, it's really hard, but I think we have to strive to push through, whether it's ascesis, not ascesis, whether it's, I forgot the word, whether it's just oppression, or whether it's depression, or whether or not we're overwhelmed with some negative emotion. I think it's just really hard to not be distracted by those things from the Lord, and not be rushed past the Lord by those things to other things, and not be distracted from the Lord. Strive. And for me, sometimes it just feels like fighting. That takes everything I got. Sometimes I just say, I'm not going to give up in this moment, but I'll pray those javelin prayers and just cry out, Lord, whatever I've got. When I feel like I want to go under a rock, and just ask the Lord to help me through this moment when I just want to watch TV by myself in my office, or
Yeah, for sure. I think we all struggle with that. This book talks a lot about that. St. John Chrysostom, striving to lay hold of what's good for you. Thank you for sharing that. Yes?
So you can't slash be like hobbits and
But I'm having trouble hearing you. What?
Hobbits and Honiton.
Oh, hobbits.
Not the ones that go down the road and go out the door, but the ones that.
Well, yeah, the ones that went out the door did that in order to save Hobbiton, so that they could return and have that type of stability that Father Patrick was talking about. Anybody have anything to say about hobbits? The Lord of the Rings is a great story about the need for stability and preserving the ordinary, homely things that are at the heart of flourishing.
I would also say that stability is a confidence, and I don't mean to make this sound simplistic. I think there is a striving, there's a knowing that we have, that comes from God. That oftentimes we are scattered, and we're looking for answers, and we need to just really, sometimes silence is a very good thing. I think that orthodoxy points us back to silence. I think the simplicity of the Jesus prayer speaks volumes. And I think just being silent and being confident. And confidence is a gift from God. So much of this is a gift from God. And recognizing that and being thankful and grateful.
Yeah, to be able to be confident and grateful in what's ordinary, including silence, is very hard, because we live in a world where just with a click of the finger, we can have our appetite for novelty and outrage and excitement gratified. And in most of human history, the actual opportunities for outrage, novelty, excitement would have been comparatively limited. And because we can have a constant diet of that dished up at command, it makes it hard to have confidence and stability in the ordinary, quiet things. Does that make sense? That's one of the reasons that I now got off the internet, including news, is because I was starting to feel bored with ordinary life, rather than just burrowing in deeper, like Father Patrick was talking about. I find myself just for no reason at all, just having like this restlessness and like this discontent and this restlessness. And then once I stopped feeding my appetite for novelty and excitement and outrage through the digital ecosystem, once I started putting boundaries in place for that, I found it really helped me not to have like this irrational, nagging discontent and wanderlust. Does that make sense? No? Doesn't make sense?
No.
Does it make sense? Does it make sense, Father? Do you have anything to add to that? What time is it? Anybody else have anything you want to say or share? Yes.
I know this is kind of a weird thing to talk about, but this
For how long?
60 seconds.
Oh,
Like no urge to breathe, no muscle twitch, no nothing. You're just sitting there relaxed, completely focused on your heartbeat or, nothing at all. And you said when you get to that stage, the cleansings become very intense, but life is really boring.
life is what?
Boring.
Oh,
Boring. And that really struck me because for me, when I started doing this, I wasn't praying. And then in the middle of it, I started praying. And then things started jumping. And now that it's increasing, life's not getting more boring. I'm growing more content. I'm having less wild emotional swings. But I'm not getting more bored. I'm actually getting more excited because it seems like everything is coming together. Stuff is happening. People are noticing, in my family, they're noticing how I am. I'm not crazy anymore. I'm not totally negative. I'm not a bitch. It's like totally different. And I would say that life gets way better, not more boring. That's what I'm anticipating. That's my hope.
oh yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I know we're almost out of time, but I wanted to just, for those of you who weren't, I won't have time for one more question, but I wanted, for those of you who weren't here last week, I just wanted to share this quote about how expressing gratitude involves, it's not to do with how much good stuff or bad stuff is happening in our life, but where we're focusing our attention. And when we focus our thoughts on the good things in our life, we can come to have appreciation for many things that we would otherwise take for granted. And I've just made a list of some of the ordinary blessings that we don't even think about, but which can become a source of profound gratitude. Did you have a question?
Well, it sort of goes along with this. I think that this is so important for kids. Daniel and I were both raised in the city. I'm part of we were trying to move out to the country, seek a slower life. And I think all these things, the groundwork is laid in a younger age. And we live in a culture where it's just pile on more activities and more things to do. And kids just don't know. They get bored. They get bored easily when life slows down. Instead of sitting there and being able to appreciate nature and appreciate the sounds they hear or know how to live this simple life themselves and do things with their hands and just know how to be. I think it's creating this culture of adults that are just frantic and don't know how to pare down as well. And a really good friend of mine, she has the saying, keep cutting back so there's peace in your home. And I think sometimes that we miss these things because we're so busy and preoccupied with worldly activities or substances that attract us. But it's those younger ages that just need to learn to be thankful. And I think it's really important for us to point out to the younger generations everything that we are thankful for and being able to verbalize it so they have this vocabulary and they can verbalize it, especially when bad things are going on or there's stressors in the family. Constantly be verbalizing these things out loud for the kids as well, so they can be aware of this growing up as well.
Yeah, that's so true. Often the parents will lead the way in the culture of grumbling and complaining, and then the children just don't even get a chance. And this isn't we all do it. This isn't to make pile on guilt, but it's so important for you as parents to lead the way in gratitude rather than grumbling. And I agree. It does go hand in hand with the ability to be slow and be still, which is the topic of the next 2 Sunday school classes that I'll be doing in this little mini series, because it really all ties in. And when children play in nature, they have their life outdoors, and lots of reading inside when it's too cold to go outside, or if you don't live in the countryside, to be able to, for children to be able to be in books. Those two things, nature and books, help to form the children in a quieter and slower frame of life, which is so important when it comes to this restlessness that we feel, and the ability to be content in the slower and ordinary things. One of the ways we cultivate that in young children is helping them to engage in activities where you go slow. And when you're out in nature, you just your kind of automatic formed in that. Does that make sense? What you said made me think of that, and I really agree with you about the importance of starting from an early age. We do need to wrap up, but there's time for one more question. Anybody have any oral observation?
We better.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your attention.